Today you need to figure out a testable question for your vascular system celery scientific inquiry. So before we do that, I'm going to show you how to come up with a testable question using the example scientific inquiry we're doing for heart rate. So the first thing that you need to do is to identify the independent variable and the dependent variable. So the independent variable means it's what we can control, the one thing that we are choosing to change. So in our heart rate experiment, the one thing that we decided that we can change is the amount of activity that a person is doing. So I can change that I can have a person just sit down and do nothing, or I can have a person get up and do different exercises. So I am controlling that. That is my independent variable. Okay. Now what we have to think about next is our dependent variable, and that's usually going to be what depends on the independent variable, obviously. So that's going to be what we're measuring, really. So when we do these different activities, what are we going to measure, and how is we're basically controlling whatever we're measuring is dependent on what we have decided the one thing that we're going to change is. So in this experiment, we're changing our activity rate. So let's say we're going to have somebody sit and do nothing, and then they're going to get up and exercise. Well, the thing that I'm going to measure, the independent variable is, the dependent variable is the heart rate. So the independent variable is what I am controlling. I'm going to choose that the amount of activity the person is going to do. The dependent variable, what I'm measuring, is the person's heart rate through those activities. Okay, now I'm going to use those two things, two ideas, and I'm going to combine them together to form a question. So I'm choosing the heart rate is my dependent variable, and the activity is my independent variable. I'm going to combine those two together to form a testable question that I know I can test in class. So here I go. How does the amount of activity that someone does affect that person's heart rate? Now that's something I can actually test in class, just like I said. So this is a testable question that includes both my dependent variable, which is my heart rate, and my independent variable, which is changing the activities. So how does the amount of activity, so I can do the sedentary sitting in a seat versus running around a lap around the playground, how is that going to affect the person's heart rate? Alright, so your task today in your group is to do the same thing now, except with your celery investigation. You need to identify your independent variable. So what's the one thing that's going to be different in this experiment? And we already identified that. That's going to be the celery stalks. One's going to have leaves, the other one's not going to have leaves. Now the next thing you have to do is figure out, looking at the materials, what are we going to measure about those celery sticks? Okay, what are we going to measure between the celery sticks with leaves versus without? Now I'm not going to tell you the answer to this. I want you to look at the material list. So we have a bunch of different materials. There's two on here that are capable of measuring something, and I think you guys can figure out which one they are. Okay, you're going to figure out which one are the two that you use to measure something, and then you're going to figure out how you could use that measurement to come up with a testable question. Alright? Just like I did before. And your question should include the independent variable, which is the celery sticks have leaves versus don't have leaves, and then how you're going to measure the dependent variable. Alright, have fun. Good luck. I'll see you tomorrow.